Thank you so much. I'm really grateful for those who are still with us for this last session. And thank you to Peter for that wonderful moderation of the panel that just came before. I'm going to ask my panelists to come up individually as I read their bios. So first, we're joined by Bobby Thomson, Global Head of Government Affairs at Visa. He leads Visa's engagement with key business and government leaders globally to promote the growth of electronic payments and advance financial inclusion. With deep expertise in public policy and payments, he shapes Visa's strategy on emerging issues and champions public-private partnerships that expand access to secure, efficient commerce. Previously, he held senior roles at Visa and American Express. Thank you. Welcome, Bobby. We're also joined by Maíra Oltra, who is the Global Vice President for Legal, Tax, and Regulatory at EBANX, a Fintech and regulatory leader. Maíra oversees legal, tax, and regulatory strategy for EBANX, a global payments company connecting merchants to emerging markets across Latin America and beyond. Her work focuses on building trust and compliance frameworks that enable digital finance to scale safely and inclusively, bridging policy, innovation, and access for SMEs and entrepreneurs worldwide. Welcome, Maíra. And finally, I'm joined by Matt Putman, co-founder and CEO of iKhokha. Matt is the co-founder, a pioneering South African fintech company, iKhokha. In recent years, he has led the company through major milestones, including being named CEO of the Year at CrossFin South Africa's FinTech Conference in 2023, 2024, and 2025, and guiding the company to win the MTN Financial Services App of the Year. Welcome, Matt. Now, as we look at this topic that has been presented to us, finance without borders, connecting the next billion, quite an ambition. And what we really want to look at is what is it going to take to power the capability, the competitiveness of financial markets, especially where access to finance is still such a challenge for so many citizens across the world. Opportunities remain uneven despite all the progress that we've made in technology. So our goal today is really to think together on how are we going to close that gap. I mean, I think we can all agree that access to finance really determines who participates in the economy, who enjoys growth, and also who gets left behind. So I'm going to start with trust, which is really the foundation of financial inclusion, and ask you, Maíra, in many emerging markets, digital finance is growing faster, but in some ways maybe outpacing regulation and consumer protection. So what practical steps can be taken to ensure that digital financial services are accessible and trusted by SMEs and entrepreneurs in emerging markets?
Oh, thanks, first of all, for the invitation. It's a pleasure being here with all of you. It's a very important question because we really need to think about how this integrity and this reliability can change the SMEs and the entrepreneurs and make them have access to the global e-commerce and the world, and also the other way around. So I think it's four pillars. You know, first of all, especially when we look at Africa and South Africa, there's like the digital divide, right? So it's the access and investments on infrastructure. So there's like a couple of data, for example, only 38% of people in Africa region have access to internet. When it goes to South Africa, it's much larger, but still it's 2% of people in their house that have access to fiber access. When we look at the data about like the cost of internet also, it's interesting that people spend around like 6% or more of their income to have access in South Africa, while in APAC regions it was like 1.8, 1.9. So it's really making sure first that people have access to a reliable, affordable, and universal internet and really infrastructure. I think that's one. The second one I'd like to bring is about credit. So when we think about small business entrepreneurs or women that have their own business, we see a huge gap on credit access. In general, traditional players or banks, they see this type of business, small business, at a higher risk. And just again, some data like only 33% of people or business in South Africa have access to credit, right? We see a huge gap, especially on the small business. And then I believe really fintechs can help on that, because there's a lot of data and digital data that you can bring to build non-traditional reports or scores that can enable the access to credit, and that can change completely, right, those business and the access they might have to the world. So there's a recent actually example, like Kenya is doing something, innovation on that front. The third one is very important and goes to the integrity to make business sustainable, right? So integrity is key, and I would bring maybe two aspects about the integrity. One, it's really about like anti-fraud, systems like the 3DS or others that make sure people really that are making purchase, or even the small entrepreneurs, have access and mechanisms to protect the transactions. That's one. But there's another one, which is really about regulations and education as well. Other important data is like that when you look at the consumer claims or complaints in South Africa, 74% on the online transactions are because of defective goods or so on. So there's also an important role that governments can play to educate people about their rights. How does it work, right? So that's, I think, a very important aspect. And I'd say last but not least, it's simplification. And how players like EBANX, for example, that's what we try to build when we are payments aggregators we handle the cross-border transactions, and we orchestrate a lot of things where we can bring a unique offer of different payment methods, and we embed the complexity for those small businesses, right? So if you want to go to each region in Africa or in Asia or in Latin America, we are embedding the regulatory, the tax, or all the complexity, and you don't need to basically understand all the local transactions. So it's complex, but it's complex for us, and we make it like easier for the small business.
Wonderful. So I suppose once trust is built, once we have these systems where integrity is assured, I want to turn to you, Matt, then to talk to us a bit about how small business turns this access into opportunity. We know that on our continent, most of the businesses that we have are in the informal sector. And you've worked directly with thousands, maybe even millions, of small and micro merchants across South Africa and in the region, many of them who started in the informal economy. So how do you think fintechs can bridge this gap between the formal and informal so that even the smallest entrepreneurs have access to financial tools?
It's a question I've spent probably 10 to 12 years thinking about almost daily, and one that I guess we haven't fully solved for yet. But I think maybe just before I answer the question, I think the point you frame is probably why is it important for us to get that right, bridging this informal to formal economy. And in South Africa specifically, I think 40% of GDP comes from this SME space. So in an economy that's struggling for growth, the actual backbone of what's keeping South Africa going are these very small informal business owners. And from an employment perspective, maybe even 50% of employment comes from SMEs. So whilst they are very small, they are informal, there are many of them, collectively they make a very big contribution to the economy. And as we all know, I guess the biggest thing that we all have been fighting is cash in Africa, and trying to move people into this digital economy so that ultimately they have access not just to payments infrastructure and being able to accept digital payments, but off the back of that really being part of the digital ecosystem and then having access to, I guess, more forward-thinking models around working capital, business management tools, etc. In terms of how we bridge that gap, I think many people will focus in on product as probably like the silver bullet to solve the situation. What we have realized through, I guess, many years of experience is that distribution is probably as important as product. So helping these informal businesses, meeting them where they are, and as important as it is to have a digital product that can be accessed through low-cost mobile phones, etc., there's often a symbiotic relationship where, especially in the kind of grassroots, lower LSM base informal economy, many of these people have a distrust of the formal banking sector, and they also have education gaps, and in many cases, I guess, fear of adopting digital and adopting products which are quite alien to them. So I think we have to find, from a distribution perspective, a way to meet SMEs in the informal economy face-to-face through digital. There's a bunch of, I guess, innovation work we've done and other people have done in making access much easier. So I think that's the first part, is actually taking the product set to their doorstep. And then the second piece is ease of use. We have to take what are, I guess, very complex products, payments, banking, lending, business management, etc., but present them in a way to an SME that, irrespective of whether you're someone who has a grade 7 education or you're someone who is running a sophisticated business in Santon, the products and the UX and the experience has to work very simplistically so that all of those businesses across the range can intuitively use those products and they don't feel intimidating, and it helps them become part of the formal economy. So I think that's quite important. Being able to onboard easily, I think in lots of, because we're in a space where there's very high barriers to entry with AML, KYC, FICA across different markets, that can often deter informal businesses from becoming, I guess, part of the digital economy. So making that process as frictionless as possible, hopefully regulators working together, governments working together to simplify the requirements to participate in this space is very important. And then the biggest, I guess, need is really working capital. How do these SMEs access working capital to grow their businesses? That's, I guess, the biggest pain point that we see in the hundreds of thousands of SMEs that we canvass. And the answer is really, you have to think about how you service these SMEs very differently, because they don't have traditional credit histories. Many of them are sole proprietors. They are not registered entities. But there are clever models and ways to build very strong credit algorithms that can sustainably lend to these businesses to help them kind of grow and evolve up the curve, and to complement that with very easy to understand kind of business management tools to educate them on how to become part of the digital economy, how to run their businesses more efficiently. So I think that's a key part of the strategy. And then maybe the last point would be, it's also very important to partner in order to do it. What we've realized, I guess, as a young fintech, you start out trying to think you can solve all the world's problems by yourself, and you realize that there's the saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And we've realized over time that having key partnerships with the likes of a Visa, partnerships with the likes of a Nedbank that we are now partnering with on our journey, partnerships previously with the likes of a Time Bank on the lending side, partnerships with Massmart from a distribution perspective. All of these ecosystem players are needed if we really want to change the trajectory and bring the kind of the largely underserved SME base that sits in informal into this formal economy.
Wonderful. I think you've taken us through a journey, just thinking about how we make sure that what we offer is easy to use, ensuring that it fits in with the regulatory scheme, but also thinking deeply about those regulatory schemes, and also just thinking about the real needs that SMMEs need, including for working capital. I think that's quite a lovely tour, through some of the issues that we're going to touch on today. Now, let me turn to you, Bobby, because we often talk about the infrastructures and the systems and what we need, but there's a question around scale, right, and interoperability, and how that is the first step towards ensuring that we reach the scale that we need to enable us to access some of these businesses, informal businesses, street vendors across Africa. So what are your thoughts on how we crack this interoperability question and the scale question?
Trudy, thank you very much, and it's a real privilege to be here today with you on such an important topic. And maybe just to answer the question, I want to go back a little bit and build on some of the comments from my colleagues, because we really think at Visa about the network effect of how you can really scale really significant access. And Visa has been in business now for over 65 years. Over that time, we've built a network that's achieved over 4.8 billion credentials in use in over 200 countries and territories around the world. We have nearly 15 billion tokens that are available to be used in over 150 million merchants. So all this work is really important in building that foundation, building the infrastructure that drives ubiquity and interoperability. But none of that can happen without the strength of partnerships. And so that's a really critical piece. And we think about this as part of our core mission, which is to uplift everyone, everywhere, through access to the most secure, reliable, convenient digital payments. And in order to make sure we get to that last mile, to get to the small SMEs, the sellers on the streets and the vendors all across Africa and the world, they need to have the trust that we talked about. They need to have the products that can actually serve their needs. And they need to know that it's going to be reliable for them and interoperable. So one of the things that Visa's really worked over the years is ensuring that there is good choice in the marketplace, good products that really do cater to the needs of these individual businesses and micro enterprises. So interoperability is a really important key to unlocking the next, issues. We realize that as much progress as we've made over the 65 plus years, we have more to go. In Africa, we've been present nearly 30 plus years in South Africa, and that's been a catalyst for our growth across the region. One of the things that we're thinking quite extensively about is the types of services and tools you need depending on the market conditions. Because we recognize that every market has a little bit difference in terms of their digital maturity, in terms of the infrastructure that a country might have. And so one of the products that we actually just launched in September in the Democratic Republic of the Congo is something called Visa Pay, which really builds a product which is simple to use. You can take a Visa credential, which not only can be used to initiate a payment, but to receive a payment on your phone. And we think that's a huge unlock in a market that has over 90% of their transactions, which are cash, and which has huge gaps in terms of financial inclusion. The other piece I would just say in all of this is that think about this as a journey which is financial inclusion is critical, financial access even more critical, but we're not done with those two things. It has to be engagement, really getting the benefit of the use of these tools and services to make a difference in their lives.
Absolutely. So engagement, ensuring that we get to that last mile and we enable usage that actually improves people's lives and gets them plugged into the system. Let me return back to you, Matt, in terms of, if we think about the continent, what are the lessons that you think can be applied, across the borders, particularly in cracking some of these challenges that we've talked about?
That's a tricky question to answer. I think first of all, if we look at the continent, you see there's a lot of success that's happened in the South African market. We have a very mature banking sector. We have a very highly card-issued, penetrated base. There's other markets I think that there's been big success in as well to unlock, inclusion. Nigeria is a very good use case. If you look at some of the fintechs in that market, it's a huge market, and there's been huge growth and huge work done to bring a lot of these SMEs into the digital economy, Kenya, we know the M-Pesa story. It's been spoken to death on many stages like this over the last kind of 5 to 10 years, but another great example. And Egypt is probably the fourth that stands out as another very strong market. I think that's making good strides in ultimately, I guess, dislodging cash in their markets. But there hasn't really been, I guess, a bigger pan-African play where you see multiple geographies or businesses across multiple geographies really getting to that sweet spot that, as a continent, we really move forward. I think having spent a lot of time over the last year looking at some of the other markets, and for us, it's a key ambition to take what we've built and export that and solve the same pain points that SMEs have in other markets in Africa. But it's quite challenging because I think the regulatory framework, the macro conditions, the difference between mobile money penetration, card penetration, are all vastly different markets, and there's a lot of friction, a lot of challenges in getting there. I think some of the learnings are probably back to the earlier point is you need an ecosystem to really crack the next wave of growth. It's not going to be about one fintech doing it. It's going to be about fintechs and banks and schemes and regulators and also capital. Whether it's the DFIs or whether it's the schemes that are trying to, I guess, foster growth, whether it's governments. I think there needs to be investments, and I think that people have to realize that a lot of these markets, especially if you look at the SME space in South Africa 13 years ago, there was no SME space. It wasn't seen as a valuable space. Whereas now today, there's multiple players, it's very healthy, there's good competition, and it's created a lot of positive momentum. So I think people have to take a long-term approach and realize that it is going to take a lot of pain initially, and it's going to take time to build those markets out, but we need an ecosystem and collaboration across regulators, banks, fintechs, on the front foot, schemes in the background, and then capital from both the private and the public sector to really kind of make a real dent moving forward.
Wonderful. I think I like that idea of an ecosystem that brings together various coalitions. I think, let me come back to you, Bobby. I think on the same theme of an ecosystem, what are your thoughts on policy, but also what partnerships can be unlocked to take this forward?
Yeah, thank you. And I think on the policy side, there's a lot that governments can do in partnership with the private sector to unlock this growth and really tap into a need that exists in terms of really engaging with these small micro enterprises and just making sure that digital access is ubiquitous. There are a few things that come to mind. One, which we talked about a little earlier, but just the mobile connectivity, ensuring that there's investment in mobile-first technologies to make sure that the economy's embraced that, because you can't have digital without having really full and adequate mobile. So that's a big piece of it. Another piece is governments themselves really taking a digital-first mindset. It's amazing what you can do if the government themselves really embrace digital in terms of how they provide services to their citizens, their constituents, because then it has a catalyst in terms of adoption very, very quickly. The education that goes with it. And that's an area where the public and private sectors can collaborate really, really closely to ensure that you're getting education at the right moment when it's most impactful to the user, right? When they get their first mobile experience and things like that. I think there's a broader set of policy issues as well, because whenever we're talking digital and mobile, there's a lot of data that's associated. It has to move from one to the other. So you need good policies that allow the movement and free flow of data in a regulated and constructive way. Those would be just some examples. And then on the private partnerships, I think, again, leveraging that network effect, what you can do together, you can certainly do more impactfully than you can do individually. And working with NGOs, working with governments, working across the payments ecosystem, with all the players there, you can really gain progress in a much more meaningful way. So we think about all of those things to really drive the ultimate goal, which is to increase access and usage of everyone who could benefit from digital payments.
Just a really amazing thoughts there, just in terms of ensuring that everyone who can benefit has a system that enables that. I'm going to come back to Maíra to just also add, just thinking about what are the kinds of inclusion initiatives that you see that can drive growth. So answering that, but also as we draw to a close, I'm going to ask you to start off with, but Matt and Bobby, to also say if there was one thing you would ask for in terms of a policy recommendation tomorrow that would make a difference, what would that be? So over to you.
Yeah, I think it's really about investment and prioritizing low-cost payment methods and making them connected cross-borderly with the ecosystem in South Africa, with the global world. So it's really, when we think about the financial inclusion, right, first thing it's not only about paying or being a consumer, but it's really about earning, right? So that's what it goes. And I really connect with your comments about like making really partnerships between public and private, really, again, thinking about interoperability, mandatory real-time payments, again, the examples we've seen in UPI and PIX in Brazil and India, that would transform a local business and small informal business to have access with like making those payment methods that are very low cost, really mandatory and, you know, across the region. And yeah, and finally, I would say some standards as well. Again, when we go to those kind of payments, the QR codes and all these standards that really help to make that being accelerate. And I think with that, really based on the data we've seen in Africa, like the size of the e-commerce that's still developing, I think that could be really a transformative and precedent and really equitable change for the region.
Thank you so much for those thoughts. I think really an ambitious idea, and also I suppose some things that our policymakers perhaps are listening to and taking inspiration from. Let me come to you, Matt, for your one thing, and then finally to Bobby.
I think interoperability is a really good one, because I think you have these closed ecosystems in different markets where you have card, you have telcos, you have, I think if you could bring that all together where all those different loops kind of become open, I think is super important. And I think the other one, which is really boring, but is probably really important, is to have a digital ID for Africa that you verify yourself once and then you use your fingerprint for the rest of your life. I think would be a huge win. I mean, look at India as a use case of how that was a catalyst in that market. I think an African digital KYC piece would be amazing.
I love that. Identify yourself once and you're sorted. Bobby, your final word and the one thing?
I would just add to the list to say regulatory harmonization, because in order to unlock innovation, you really need markets to embrace the different technologies. And if you have really different structures in one market versus the other, it just makes it very hard. So the more we can harmonize approaches across regulatory bodies, the more we can do to gain access for those who need it.
Yeah. And truly have one market that really ensures that we get the scale and the usability and the growth that we seek. Thank you so much to the panelists for sharing your experience and vision. I think even at this hour, I see a very rapt and engaged audience. So we're truly grateful. I think what we've really heard today is about trust, is about partnerships, ecosystems, but also about smart regulation that gets the job done without being burdensome. And in so doing, with that combination with that vision and that combination of policy, we can unlock the potential of 1 billion futures, which would really be transformative for this continent and beyond. Please join me in thanking Bobby, Matt, and Maíra for this wonderful panel and being part of the B20 Summit. Thank you, everyone.